there was a period of time I really didn't care for Tchaikovsky because I just didn't think Tchaikovsky's developments were as interesting. And if I could, I shake my head at myself.
We've just lost every listener, Matt. Every
Well,
Hi, everyone. Welcome to OSA Backstage. This is Dani Meyer, despite the quality of my voice. Today's episode is a little different. It's just myself and our guest, composer Matt Fuerst. Matt is not only a composer, he is a good friend, and he's the brainchild behind our program notes for the Omaha Symphony. Something that I really love about Matt is that every time I send him a program, he finds the score and does a deep dive on the music itself. And so I thought, for this really classic Masterworks program that we have coming up at the end of April, there's no better person to talk about what makes a symphony than Matt Fuerst. I think you're in for a treat. This is definitely a nerdy deep dive, which, let's be honest, that's my favorite. And I think you're going to have a good time. Enjoy.
They're like, oh my God, Dad's recording the podcast.
yes.
Oh, hi, Matt. How are you?
Oh, hanging in. How about you guys? How are you all doing?
We're good. We're good. My voice is an octave lower than usual. Patrick gave me his cold
Oh no,
or
I'm so
allergies.
sorry.
It's fine. It's just this for now. So I have the mic set up, so hopefully it'll actually catch up this like bass baritone register that I've bottomed out into.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mathew Fuerst. I am a composer, and for the last two seasons, I've had the wonderful joy and honor of writing the program notes for the Omaha Symphony.
I'm so pleased to have you on, primarily because I have all these questions. It's going to, you know what, Matt? It's going to feel like your daughters are interrogating you, and I'm very curious if they've asked similar questions. Because we have this one, I love the fact that you're a composer who has been deep diving into program notes, because half of the time you send them back, you're like, I had no idea that like Sibelius did this or that whole structure did this way. It's like,
Yeah.
aren't you who so okay, so what are you learning when you go to composition school? What are they, is it totally dependent on the teacher? What are they walking you through? Like, how does it even start?
Oh, well, I
Sorry.
think that's okay. I think it depends on the teacher, and it honestly depends on the student as well. I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. I think it depends on the age of the student, the goal of the student, what they want to, where they want the careers to go, what they want the careers to do. Again, a lot of factors that go into it. And I'm always a little weary about
Okay.
saying composition is this or that because, as I tell my own students, I could have 10 composers in the room here, and if you ask them how do you compose, you'd get 100 answers. So
That reminds me of this great. I was playing with Cincinnati the same week that one of their percussionists retired, and
mhm.
he made a joke that he'd performed Ravel's Bolero under seven different conductors and 23 different tempos. And I thought that was the funniest thing
That's
I'd ever
amazing.
heard. Okay, so in your case,
Mhm.
when did you know you wanted to be a composer? And how did that even, what were your next steps?
So for me, it actually started really young. So I was born in outside LA, and then my family moved outside Chicago when I was six or seven. Anyway, uh, and my mom, when we moved, bought a piano. She was thinking about starting piano lessons again, things like that. She had taken some as a child. And according to her, I don't remember any of this, but I guess I was completely fascinated by the instrument, wanted to press the keys, make sound. And she was very much like, no, if you have to practice, you'd have to take lessons and practice. I was like, okay. She's like, but you'd have to practice every day, your birthday, holidays. Again, I was like, okay, fine. And I guess this went on for like 6 months. And then finally she gave in and I started taking lessons. I think she wanted to avoid the inevitable fighting over practicing that is a part of life for every child, I suppose. But what I remember is at one point within a year or so, I played like a simplified version of Beethoven's Ode to Joy, and someone must have gotten gotten me to listen to or showed me or let me listen to a little bit of the actual symphony itself with the chorus and everything. And I I vaguely remember really liking it and thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to save my allowance money instead of buying, baseball cards. I'm going to go to the record store and buy this record. So I went to the record store. It's a place called Rose Records, which later became Tower Records. And I went through the record store and I found this LP of this majestic looking, individual on a horse. And I thought, this must be the piece. And of course, if you know Beethoven history, you probably have guessed I bought the wrong one because that was Napoleon.
Yep.
And so I went home to discover that I had bought the third symphony instead. But I fell in love with that symphony and decided that, and I remember thinking this, I want to do to other people what that symphony was doing to me. And so from that point
Sorry.
on, no, it's okay.
I want to do to other people with that symphony. Just carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, I remember just being really excited by this music. Just, I want to do whatever this is. And I was really, really fortunate on a couple fronts. My parents, who are not musicians, were really supportive, and they did everything they could to support me, and just kind of just whatever I wanted to do. So I was really, really lucky there. And then I was also lucky in that we didn't have a ton of money, but the town I grew up in had a really fantastic library, and so I was able to go to the public library and check out books on composition and check out all these records. And one record led to another composer, which led to another composer, reading the liner notes and things like that. And it became, like I said, I think by the time I was 10, I knew I wanted to be a composer.
Oh, I love everything about that. So Beethoven, so an accidental Beethoven 3 was your rabbit hole to composition because you wanted other people to feel the way that symphony made you feel.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm and genuinely, every time I've opened up program notes for the next concert, especially if we have someone contemporary on the program, your Missy Mazzolis, but even your Eric Korngolds and of course your we just had Nino Rota on this last Jocelyn program. And these are all, they're called child prodigies, but I'm starting to wonder if prodigy is really just a catch-all for kid decided he was really or she was really into something and just went wholeheartedly into it. Because I think we're all like with that kind of kid, right? Like everybody's a kind of kid. You're a space kid, you're a dinosaur's kid, you're a horse's kid, you're like, you have something that you can't stop obsessing about. And I think the difference between just being a space kid and being an astronaut, or just being a kid who enjoys music and deciding at age 10 you're going to be a composer, is that something's not letting you let it go.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, so what happened? You're 10, you've decided you want to be a composer, you're renting different records, or you're borrowing different records and different books on composition. At what point do you decide I'm going to go to school for this?
The more you learn about, the musical world, the more you start hearing about, conservatories and, and even reading biographies of composers. I read about the Paris Conservatorium, reading about certain composers, or schools like this. I actually got, again, just very, very fortunate in that, in the way that people or institutions were very supportive of me. I applied to a camp under the suggestion of my piano teacher. I studied with a man named Larry Diefenbach, my first in St. Charles, Illinois, where I grew up. And I think he suggested that I go to like a music arts camp. He was really helpful in kind of guiding my parents about what to think about, what to do, given that I was really interested in having a career in music. So I went to a 2-week camp called Blue Lake Arts Camp, or Blue Lake Music Camp, and really had a great time there. But from there, I heard about this place called Interlochen. So I applied the next year to Interlochen, and my parents were always very, very, supportive. Like I said, just like, well, go ahead and try, see what they say. And I got in. and I got in as a pianist. I applied just as a pianist. So they gave me a very nice scholarship. I was able to go, and there I started taking my first composition class. But the teacher actually, after a week, decided to give me private lessons instead. And then from there, I applied. I got to go a second year through scholarship, and then applied to the American Arts Academy. Again, my parents was like, "Go ahead and try," and I got really lucky because they gave me an extraordinarily generous scholarship. I was able to go as a double major, and so again from there, then I really got to learn about more about Eastman, Juilliard, Oberlin, CIM, all the great, that's just four of all the great music institutes there are in this country. And, and then from there, I had people that were really helpful in just kind of, guiding me towards, how to prepare for these auditions, how to prepare a portfolio and all this stuff. So, again, I just was really, really fortunate to have a lot of really helpful people.
Man, I also love that mantra. It's like, well, go ahead and try, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
So it's
again,
so
I
it's
was
not
really
yes.
lucky.
Yeah.
My parents were like that.
Ugh, I love that. So okay, so you're auditioning for schools, you have your portfolios. You were already into orchestra music when you and I met.
Mm-hmm.
But do you remember what your first orchestra concert was? Was it at Interlochen?
Honestly, I was thinking about this. I truly do not remember. I'm trying to think about it probably. Well, I don't know because we didn't really get a chance to go see the CSO when I was a kid. We would on occasion like treat ourselves and go to Ravinia and sit in the outdoor,
Mhm.
Grassy area. But I don't know. I don't really remember seeing it. I think we saw Pavarotti once, honestly, or heard him. Where we were saying we couldn't see him. And we would on occasion, like once or twice a summer, go to the Grant Park Orchestra. And again, I think that was free, and we got to sit and I remember most though is listening to music and seeing the beautiful Chicago skyline. But yeah, the first real orchestra concert, I really don't remember at this point. I feel like I've seen so many that sometimes
Yeah.
they all kind of blur together as well. So yeah, I'm sorry. I knew this question was coming. I was thinking a lot about it. I just could not remember.
It's a weirdly hard question. I think they all tie. You have to start picking an age and say like, okay, well, did I go to a field trip concert
Yeah.
in third grade or something like that? Okay, so here's a potentially stupid question. When you start studying composition, I assumed that you would get scores upon scores of orchestra music, but that's not necessary. That's not true, is it?
No. Well, that was not my experience, I should say. Again, I think what's really difficult about talking about how composition works is that there's so many there's so many perspectives and multiple perspectives from a single person about the world of composition. So
Okay,
Mhm.
so let me reframe it. When you first started, because Beethoven 3 was that first like mind blowing, but when you had your first composition teacher, were you starting with piano scores because you're a pianist? Or did they pick a composer that you were already into and say like, okay, so let's start with this? Or do you start with your own material and then they start giving you examples? Or is it all of the above?
It's kind of all the above. So I remember one of my some of my first compositions were very influenced by Prokofiev. I loved Prokofiev when I was 12, 13, 14. Couldn't get enough Prokofiev. And in
He
fact,
is a scourge.
I wrote this small piano concerto. I think when I was 13, 14. So it's like a 2-3 minute piano concerto. And I actually found the score when we were moving. And it's almost like it's a 13-year-old taking like bits of the first Prokofiev piano concerto and trying it on their own.
Mhm.
It's and I remember writing the piece, and I remember certain things that my composition teacher at the time was telling me things to think about and stuff. but it depends on the teacher. I always think it depends on the individual student. My experience, especially when I got to the academy, was while I was learning, all the theory that one learns, theory, ear training, things like this. My composition teacher actually let me kind of just explore, and that was something that I really love about her to this day. Her name was Elaine Broad. She to the point where when I was at Interlochen, that's where I was introduced to Stockhausen, Boulez, Ligeti. But the person that really made an impact on me was John Cage. Like I couldn't get enough John Cage. I read his book Silence. I read another book of essays X. I wrote a piece that was just like 72 squares with symbols, and wrote a happening. And so I'm really grateful that she let me just kind of experiment and explore various ways of creating music. I know not everyone agrees with that approach, but to each their own, I suppose. But I'm grateful that was my experience.
Would When you say that not everybody agrees with that, do you think that there are other programs where you have it's almost like a syllabus of like, we're going to start with these pieces and then gradually work out? So it's a very curated curriculum?
There might be. I'm thinking. There was a composer who has since passed away that during one audition made it very clear that he thought John Cage was a fraud. He thought what my teacher was doing was absolutely not the right thing. He was really unhappy about the fact that I had not completed training in species counterpoint, yet was doing all these other things. I was 17 at the time. And so he obviously disagreed with this approach to composition, and fair is fair, I suppose. And I kind of, as I've gotten older, I see his point a little bit more now. But for me and for what I was interested in, I really appreciate the fact that Dr. Broad let me try things, and she really tried to give me guidance and gave me scores, and actually, again, another shout out to libraries. But I remember at Interlochen, the librarian at the music library, they had like a where you could turn out records and CDs and stuff. She was it got a point. I checked out so much stuff that she would actually pull things out that she would find that she thought I would be interested in. So I would walk and she'd go, Matt, I got these things here. I was like, oh, awesome. And I would go home and check them out and things like that. So
come on.
So again, it's shout out to the importance of libraries, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely. Shout out to libraries.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so what I really am hearing and what I'm loving is this idea of everyone around you say like, oh, this is a rabbit hole kid. If he finds something he's interested in, he's gonna deep dive it just forever. And we'll see what happens. Okay, I'm not gonna. I apologize. Maybe I shouldn't try and generalize your entire life.
I guess I don't know.
It just sounds like your teachers and your librarians collectively saw that you were curious and just kept letting you be curious, which is half the fun of of trying something. Okay, so does that mean that you've written at least one symphony?
Mm-hmm.
I know that. You've also written quite a lot of chamber music and solo piano music, but did that mean that you weren't really? No, that's not true. Okay, so to back up for the listener, because I know Matt, and so I'm cheating. I have all this knowledge of Matt. So what I know about Matt is that what he told me when he was getting ready to write notes on Dvorak and Elgar for our performances back in February, he told me that his teacher at Juilliard, Carigliano, I think it was Craig. No, okay.
Maybe I can't remember what I said. So
Carigliano or Rouse, one of them would give you listening assignments.
Oh yes.
Rouse. Okay, so Christopher Rouse would give you listening assignments on certain composers, and Elgar was one of them. Mm-hmm. So were orchestra scores mixed in more later on in your schooling, or did they just kind of come in as they felt required?
No, I, uh, I remember again, it's just the luck of being at Interlock, and it was the first time I had access to orchestral scores, so I would check them out and look at them and study them just kind of on my own. And before going there, I loved the symphonies of Prokofiev. Obviously, I had all 7 of them, on CD. I loved concertos, especially piano concertos. I loved piano concertos, which was probably pretty obvious being a pianist. So I kind of immersed myself with orchestra music a lot, and in fact, we when I was growing up, there was a radio station, WNIB, in Chicago, no longer in existence, but it was one of 2 stations. And they used to have these catalogs that would come out, these monthly guides, and we would literally sit and circle when there was a piece we wanted to listen to, and I would either make sure I had my cassette tape or something like that. And oftentimes it was like a symphony, or so I loved the orchestral literature, but it was really amazing to get to study. And to look at some of these scores, and then as I got to Eastman and then Juilliard, you take orchestration classes, and you also get to know other instrumentalists more, and I would ask them questions about writing idiomatically. I would try things out and show them, and so orchestral literature is always something I loved and a part of my my upbringing, I guess, without for lack of a better word. Wasn't until I was at Interlock that I was able to really kind of for the first time like get my hands on these scores and look at them and see what they looked like and how things were written. So I don't know if that
I think the reason why I'm asking, it does. The reason why I'm asking is because every time I get notes from you for an upcoming concert, the amount of excitement in just the email for the notes, just like, oh my God, I can't believe he did this and this. Like, did you notice this about Holst? Did you realize this about Elgar? It's like, no, I didn't. I play bass. And I feel like every time you write notes for a concert for us, it's like you're discovering something fresh and exciting and new, and which in turn makes me excited. So I think I was just genuinely curious. I was like, okay, so Matt clearly has not lost this this curiosity, but does this mean that he didn't study these works at school? It's like, is this so? Let's go back. I have one of my favorite stories with you. Sibelius 5, we did it. When did we do Sibelius 5? It was in the last couple seasons.
Last season, I think it was October, maybe.
Yep, I think you're right. So October 2023, and I sent you well in advance. I sent you like, here's the season, and like, okay, but fair enough. I don't like Sibelius 5. Like, okay, you don't have to like it. You just have to write program notes for it. And then every email after that was like, well, hang on, he did something cool. Wait, no, hang on. Okay, I found something else. Wait, hang on. Did you know that he took the Swans and he transformed it? Like, so by the time we got to October and you were still living in Omaha, I knew that Alejandro, our artistic conductor at the time, was going to need to duck from the concert talk early so that he could prep to conduct Mozart's I think it was Magic Flute Overture. And so I was like, well, who can I bring in to talk about Sibelius 5? It's like, well, let's make Matt admit to this entire symphony audience that he told me he didn't like Sibelius 5, and by the time we played it, he was geeking out about it.
One of my favorites now.
Okay, so, but you knew, I mean, obviously you'd studied some Sibelius. So what do you think has changed? What do you think has changed since you left school?
That's a good question. I don't know. Oh, well, it could be when I was still in school, I had a little bit more of what's a nice way to put it, rigid way of how I thought music should work. And I think over the years, I've learned how to listen to music on its own terms versus listening to music with expectation of what I think it should do.
Okay.
And in the case with Sibelius 5, there were moments I did love. Like to me, the ending of the first movement is just one of the most incredible things in the
Mhm.
symphonic literature. Um, and I always kind of thought that, but I didn't understand the structure. And so the more I looked at the structure and started to understand what he was doing and why he made the decisions he made, and then was able to start to see how from the very opening, the idea eventually becomes the swan theme. So that by the time you get to that theme, which is very lovely, I always thought was lovely, went from being something really lovely to something extraordinarily powerful, and like that sense of inevitability that I think you get when you hear that theme for the first time. I mean, it so gives me chills thinking about it. Um, it, it was astonishing to see all this, and really kind of take a deeper dive, I guess, into the music to try to understand it, try to understand what he was doing. And I think when as I got older, I started making that shift. Um, it I started to enjoy other composers. Like I have to admit, Brahms is maybe my all time favorite composer. To me,
Okay.
he's the ideal.
Hmm.
To the point where there was a period of time I really didn't care for Tchaikovsky, because I just didn't think Tchaikovsky's developments were as interesting. And if I could, I shake my head at myself. Um,
We've just lost every listener, Matt. Every.
well, but wait, but I mean, but I remember hearing a Tchaikovsky symphony and just like, gosh, this is wonderful. And then I started to think about it and realized that the problem wasn't Tchaikovsky, it was me. Like I wanted Tchaikovsky to do certain things that really maybe didn't fit with the type of composer Tchaikovsky was, or didn't fit with these beautiful, longer melodic, melodies, versus the
Mhm.
more short motivic thing. Not that Tchaikovsky doesn't do short motivic work. He certainly, I mean, Tchaikovsky Five's all about that, right? But um, that was, I think, maybe one of the first moments in my life, and this is maybe 15 years ago now, that I just kind of had this realization of just like I need to remember to listen to the music on its terms instead of trying to listen to it according to what I think the music should do. And it really, once I started doing that, it opened up a it, it it I wouldn't say introduced me to the composers per se, but it opened up a new way of listening that allowed me to enjoy so much more music.
I I wonder how many of us are doing that unconsciously or subconsciously rather. Like we read a book and it doesn't do the thing. We've got the Barbie and Ken doll like now kiss. That
Sure.
we right that we I'm genuinely curious now if a lot of us do that with art in general and just have no idea that we're subconsciously doing that, and that's why we don't enjoy something. Um, I also think I've talked about this, the fear of the unknown when it comes to quote unquote new music, whether it's just written
Mm-hmm.
or it's just new to us. It can be a scary thing because we have there's no comfort in it yet. Like it almost doesn't even matter if we know we like the composer. We have nothing really to glom onto. And so
Yeah.
you go in, it just feels like this big trust exercise. So, we've been one of the things I really like about your program notes is that you literally are getting the score and you are deep diving the score for us so that we can follow along with the piece and even within each movement as we progress. And this brings me to my big point, Matt, that I'm gonna need you to be patient with me because I'm about to say the word why about 6 dozen times.
That's cool. I have 7 year
Okay.
olds, so I'm used to it.
Yes, thank God. Um, Almost every single symphony we play, at some point, you will use the phrase sonata form.
Yes.
Okay, so my first question is where the heck did sonata form come from? Do we know when it started and why is it still used now in 2025? So where did it come from, Matt? Because the thing is in everything. And what is it?
Okay, so I think let's start with the what is it. So sonata
Yeah.
form is is a formal structure in which you have three main sections, what you call the exposition, the development, and the recapitulation. The role of the exposition is to introduce the listeners to the main musical material, and often it's broken up into a first theme and a second theme, so that there's a key change within that, and that is one of the crucial elements about its evolution. Then you get to the development section, and this is the part that is, I think, oftentimes the hardest to write, because there's no real quote unquote rule about how to do it. Like, there's a real clear structure with the exposition about how things work. The development is kind of anything goes. In fact, what's fascinating is to see how different composers handle the development. But in general, what happens is the composer will fragment the musical ideas and move very rapidly from key to key in order to create a sense of excitement and instability. And this is why oftentimes in the middle of pieces, things really start to feel like they're moving at a faster pace. What I think the listener is hearing are these rapid key changes, and it's like changing location very, very
So
quickly.
it's like 2D Tetris goes into 4D Tetris.
Sure. As someone that doesn't play a lot of video games, I will say okay. So sorry.
Great.
But and then eventually it leads back to the recapitulation, and the recapitulation is important for two reasons. It restates the two themes from the exposition, but it also is the return to the original key, to the tonic, and then everything is stated in the tonic from that point on. So it's really a return home. How it evolved, I'm not sure if anyone knows how or when or has this exact moment like, this is the piece. Again, a music historian may be able to do that more than me, but they did evolve, it seems, from the Baroque dance suites, which were often in what we call binary form, A and B, and very often in the B section, the beginning, there's a bit more harmonic instability. The composer will start to move around a little bit to different keys before returning to the original key. So here we see kind of the beginning stages of sonata form, and then over time, as these dances started to get a little bit bigger, you went from what they call binary form to rounded binary, where the B section, the composer would again go to a bunch of different keys, but then bring back the theme from the A. So again, it gets a little bit larger, and then it's really if I kind of looked this up a little bit, kind of knowing what you were going to ask, just to make sure that I remembered correctly.
You're giving away all my secrets, man.
And I'm sorry. I mean, wow, I was not expecting this question. Anyway, but I did remember, which I was happy. Bach's son C.P.E. Bach was really one of the most important composers in really the development of sonata. And for the listeners, if you don't know the work of C.P.E. Bach, I highly recommend it. I think he's a very underrated composer. He's written a number of really wonderful keyboard concertos. In fact, one of my favorites is a concerto for pianoforte and harpsichord, where he really, I think, does just a brilliant job in playing with the timbres of the two instruments. It's a fabulous piece of music. So I highly recommend.
I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, the C.P.E. Bach double concerto.
Yeah.
But anyway, he really started in his works, started expanding, making the pieces larger, and then starting to create contrast within the actual quote unquote A section itself. And now we're really seeing the language evolve into sonata form as we know it. And then I think becomes really crystallized under Haydn. This is a very simplified, version of this. And again, there may be a music historian may say, well, yes, however, and so my apologies if I got anything wrong, but
for our purposes, okay, that's very helpful. So it has been around at least since C.P.E. Bach's time.
Yeah, so 1730s, 1740s.
Great.
1750s.
And yet,
there.
And yet there's been, okay, so before we get into, your Beethoven 3 moment, to a degree, for centuries, sonata form has remained this huge guiding light for writing or framework rather for writing symphonies, right? Because we have everything from the planets. Holst, too nervous to write an actual symphony. His movements still employ sonata form in some cases. And then you have our upcoming Mozart and Dvorak concert. All three pieces on this program use sonata form for almost all of their movements.
Mm-hmm.
So this has existed for a long time, and I think it just sounds like composers saw it in action and like, oh yeah, that's actually pretty nifty. I'm going to keep doing this. But it sounds like it's less of a strict set of parameters and more of like a Pirates of the Caribbean. These aren't rules so much as guidelines.
I think that what makes it so appealing is that it gives a kind of foundation for the composer to work with. It gives the composer, but there's enough flexibility that the composer can make alterations according to what they see fit. So, I was thinking about sonata form, and what struck me is how interesting it is that you have like Mozart, which is often a very clear sonata form, but then you have, the Sibelius, which is, that first one's a hybrid of a couple different movements, and he does this in a very fantastic way. Or then you have the Elgar, in which he brings back the introduction that acts as kind of like a musical cue for the listener that, okay, now we're going to go into the development. Okay, here's the introduction again. Now we're going into the recap. But then, I as I was saying about the sonata form a lot, I kind of chuckled because I remember a few years ago, just for fun, analyzing the first movement of Ligoti's Piano Concerto. It was a piece I played as soloist at Eastman my senior year, but I never really sat down and analyzed it because I was way too busy trying to, learn the notes. And what struck me when I did the analysis was like, it's basically sonata form. But what's interesting is I'm not sure, because of the harmonic language, one would ever think of that. In the same way that you asked about the Elgar and Sibelius, one of the things that I think I had trouble with was because the harmonic vocabulary is so, much more traditional than say other pieces, that I instinctively immediately thought, okay, sonata form, and that set up a certain amount of expectations. That it took me a while to understand, okay, this is something a little bit different. And once I understood that, my appreciation of the music, and in both cases these were pieces that I was initially ambivalent about at best, I ended up falling in love with when doing the program notes, when I understood what the composer was doing more.
Okay, so in this case, it's kind of like, weirdly, having this framework can make you assume things that actually aren't true about the music itself. Is that?
I think it's more the musical language, the harmony. So, like with the Ligeti, because it's which again is if anyone listening, I highly recommend the Piano Concerto, an absolutely fabulous piece of music. But the first move of that, because of the harmonic language and the musical language that Ligeti is using, I'm not sure. I can't speak for anyone else. I can say for myself, the thought never even crossed my mind that there might be a classically informed structure to this. Whereas because both Elgar and Sibelius work with relatively traditional harmony, I kind of went in with a certain assumption and then realized I had to kind of alter it a bit because of the harmony, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so does that mean, is it safe to say that a lot of the breaking of structure and the destruction of boundaries in writing new music, or writing music that's not supposed to fit within these more formal structures that have been around for centuries, right? Is it safe to say that most of that happens or has to happen at the harmonic language level?
Well, I think if you think about the way sonata form is structured, it's all based on tonality. It's very much evolved from a tonic dominant relationship, or a tonic and in a minor key and relative major. So key signatures, things like this, composers would only go to certain certain closely related keys for a time being. I think as the harmonic language started to expand, with especially starting with Beethoven, but really even more so in the 19th century, that's when you start to see a little more flexibility and structure. You start to see a little more thinking about how, to work within the general framework of sonata form without completely being dogmatic. So for example, a piece like Dance Macabre, a piece of programmatic music is also basically sonata form. A bit flexible, but again, what I think it does is it gives the composer enough of a framework and a structure that they can then let their imaginations, in a sense, run wild without running so wild that you're like a little kid running downhill as fast as you can. And really, I think the goal for any composer, of course, is to be as direct with their communication as possible. And a great way to ensure that, I think, is having structural clarity, and that's where sonata form can give you both that that structure while also enough flexibility that you can play within it. If that
And I
answers
bet
your question.
it does. And I bet you that the audience comes to expect, to a degree, the audience, it is like the audience has listening expectations almost the moment something starts. And so whether or not you're following along with this framework, if you just ended abruptly in the development, I'm positive that everybody in that hall would just be like, what? Would just be clenched nerves quivering, just waiting for some sort of like reconciliation at the end. Okay, that's very helpful. So my next question is, what makes a symphony a symphony? I'm going to go back to Holst for a second, because this poor man was so nervous to write a symphony, but then he gave us instead a 7-movement, essentially planet symphony. It's a symphony. It's a work that, yes, you could like segment if you really wanted and play an individual planet at a time. It's not as good, but he essentially wrote a symphony about the planets, right? And just called it not a symphony. So what makes, if you take the title away from it, what makes a symphony a symphony? Does the material have to be thematically related? Does it have to be same key?
Honestly, I think it depends on the composer, the era, everything else. I chuckle because I was just thinking about how often I say to my students when we're talking about whatever in composition, well, it depends, when they ask a question, and that there is so much, there's so many other elements to it. So, I mean, the planets, yeah, it's funny. You could think of it that way. It's funny. I never actually thought of it as a symphony, though. With the program notes, like I never noticed that kind of arch structure that I think I wrote to you about. Just like, oh my gosh, wait a second, that is really, really brilliant. But I think in some ways it is just, especially when you get to closer to the late 19th, early 20th century, it is really boils down to what are you calling it. So like La Mer, I mean, come on, that's a symphony, right?
Right.
All those large-scale multi-John Adams movements, Harmony Lyra, not even sentimental music, all of these, City Noir, all these wonderful, wonderful pieces, they're basically symphonies, So I think, for some composers, it may be like in Debussy's case, I think he wanted to separate himself from the Germanic tradition. So there's an element of like nationalism there. I don't know what John Adams's reason may be, and he may, if he ever heard me say this, he may be like, no, Matt, you're absolutely wrong, and but to me they seem like symphonies. But it could be,
I think you have a great point. You're absolutely right. It could just be because it's weirdly scarier when a contemporary composer puts out a symphony number whatever. I don't know what it is. I feel like a contemporary composer puts out a multi-movement work, but they call it like the C. I'm like, yeah, I know what that sounds like. Doesn't matter if I've never heard that's
I think that's the biggest
interesting.
thing is there's such weight with the symphony. Like I remember you had mentioned earlier that I've written one, and I remember that piece initially started as a song cycle and then became was going to be a violin sonata, and then was going to be this orchestral piece. And it wasn't until the piece was almost done. I remember, it was the last piece I wrote in New York, and when I was living there, and I remember lying in bed thinking about the piece and trying to think of a title, just like, oh God, this might be a symphony. And I was up all night, like freaking out about like what I just done. Like it was like this. Do I dare call it this? Do I, And finally, I decided, oh, what the heck? Why not? Because if one were to actually look at my website, you'd find, as my wife loves to joke, my ability to give titles is not great. Violence not number one. Violence not number two.
There's nothing wrong with simplicity. There's
Yeah,
absolutely nothing wrong with simplicity.
But I can say for my own personal experience, it was scary to try to wrap my head around potentially even calling it that, and then eventually I was like, okay, it made sense to me, and oddly enough, in hindsight, it was kind of a capstone to everything I was concentrating on as a composer. At the time, I didn't know it was going to be the last piece I wrote in New York as a New Yorker. And so it in hindsight it looks even more fitting now, but at the time it was a really nerve-wracking thing because of the weight of saying symphony. So I mean there's probably a bit of that as well. I think in the 20th century there was again a distance from the norms of the 19th century. New symphony, new century. There's a new musical vocabulary. That is old hat. I think there's a bit of that as well. But
Mahler versus Strauss.
Yeah, absolutely. Mahler doesn't make it easy with every symphony. What does he say? Something along the lines of like, should be a world unto itself or something like that. I mean, gosh, you already have enough, struggles with like Beethoven and Brahms, and now you have Mahler saying this as a composer. Come on. But
I mean, to be fair, my music history teacher used to say that Mahler couldn't turn off the tap. So I think he had too many worlds unto himself in each of his symphonies. But
yeah, but I think, but I really think it's fascinating because I think every composer approaches it differently, and that's kind of what makes all of this so interesting and so wonderful, so cool, and why it's so hard, I think, to say it's this or it's this, because for every individual it's slightly different, and that's why we have this incredibly rich world of just wonderful and different music.
it's very maybe it's Brahms's curse also on the rest of us. Schumann cursed Brahms and gave him 20 years of anxiety before he cranked out Symphony Number 1.
Yeah.
And so maybe Brahms's 4 stunning, perfect, don't change a thing symphonies makes everybody else all the more nervous to title theirs symphony after him. But that's, it's personal speculation. But okay, that all makes sense, and I just want to shake my fist at it, because like I guess you can't have concrete answers with composers who have long been in the ground, and I'm sure spinning in some cases with how their symphonies are being interpreted, or their non-symphonies are being interpreted. But here's a question.
Just happy that they're being played. So it
that's a much more optimistic. Oh, that's a much more optimistic view of it. Okay, so here's a more fun question, which I did not put in the outline, so I actually get to surprise you this time. If you could have studied with any composer that was gone before your time, who would that be?
Ooh.
He's blinking and looking into the distance.
The first name that pops to mind is Nadia Boulanger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who unfortunately stopped composing after the death of her sister, who was a brilliant composer. I mean, just stunningly beautiful music. But just what I've read about her, and I've read she's a book that I've read some of. Kind of her bits about her teaching and just kind of some of her musical philosophy that I think of anyone that I could think of, I think it'd be Boulanger.
So if you're not familiar with that name, she was like the preeminent composition teacher in the 20th century. Mm-hmm. She taught your Ravels. There's this fabulous Gershwin story where he apparently went over there and asked to have lessons, wanting her to teach him more about how Ravel composed, and she famously said, "Why be a second-rate Ravel when you could be a first-rate Gershwin?" Just her name is attached, her pedagogy, her hands are on everything good 20th century. Ah, that's a good answer,
Yeah,
Matt.
she's taught everyone from Philip Glass to Aaron Copland to Piazzolla to, I mean, it's an incredible list of composers. One of my favorite stories, and I don't know how true this is, but it may just be kind of one of those anecdotes, but I love it anyway. Is I guess when Piazzolla was studying with her, he was trying to write music kind of very Stravinskian, and I guess she kept saying, like this is fine, but where's Piazzolla? Where's Piazzolla? And I guess one day in a press room, he was just kind of playing around with like tango, and she walked by, kind of burst in and said, "There, finally, I'm hearing Piazzolla." And kind of that was a way of kind of encouraging him to continue to explore the tango, which and what's
See,
interesting is I
see,
think when you listen to like the new tango of Piazzolla, like especially some of the stuff in the 80s, like you can really hear the Stravinsky elements of it too, which is really really cool. It's just something really angular about some of that music. That's
see,
really
but this is another example of a teacher saying the right thing at the right time.
Mhm.
That's all about letting the person just be themselves.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a true story or not, but I love that story, so I'm going to say it anyway because it's a great
We're
story.
gonna say it's true.
Yeah.
We're gonna add, you know what? We said it's true. It's
Yeah.
absolutely true. Um, okay, it's a great answer. Okay, so besides, well, maybe you wouldn't answer Boulanger for this next one. What composer did the most brilliant rule breaking? Like who do you think constantly upended things, but somehow set like a new trend? Because when I think about, I have an answer for this, but I'm curious what.
Uh, the first name that comes to mind, I guess, is Debussy. But I think what's so wonderful about Debussy and why it works is something that Crigliano said to me in a lesson once, which is if you take something away, you must replace it with something else. And I think a great example of this is his second prelude, Sales, which is all whole tone scale. He uses just one whole tone scale until the climax of the moment, which he uses then a pentatonic scale. And it's a complete shift in color. And it's kind of like the way I've always kind of thought it was a simultaneous climax slash B section before returning to the whole tone scale again. So it's a very it's kind of, there's an example of a simple ternary form, ABA, again, something that would eventually become sonata form. But here Debussy is replacing, tonality and traditional scales with newer scales and still maintaining elements of tradition. So to me, and I'm not sure how much of the 20th century would happen if it weren't for Debussy.
You love that. Last composition question. I have 8 billion. We're gonna do this again, Matt. Don't worry.
Okay,
We will
happy
have
to.
you back. There's never any shortage of mostly me looking through my bass part going, why in the hell would he write this like this or she do this? But
So can I tell
um
you something? Every now and then I have to play my own music, and I ask myself the same thing.
why did
Why did I
what
do
idiot
this?
what idiot wrote this for me?
Yeah,
Wait.
is there four-letter word here? Like, come on. So,
Oh my
so
God.
I get that.
Even my favorites, I have moments like that. It's like how dare you make this hard and good? How dare you? Okay. What composer do you think laid the best groundwork for the composers to follow them? Whether, you have Boulanger as a fabulous teacher, but maybe someone not necessarily laying the groundwork as a teacher, but just as a composer. Is it someone like Haydn? Because when I think of, he's the grandpa symphony, right? Like his 104 taught Mozart, taught Haydn, taught Mendelssohn just by existing. Who do you think did the best work at that?
The first name comes to mind is Bach. Um, I think it's really hard because I'm not sure there's just one. It's there's so many wonderful composers. There's so many kind of branches that simultaneously like spread out and then kind of interconnect, and it's there's just so much wonderful music that I don't know to say there's one is it feels very hard to do. But I mean, if I were to say one just off the top of my head, I guess Bach.
That's a really good point. That's a
But
really good
it's
point. Yeah.
it's again, it's kind of like when I think about, you know, someone sometimes asks, who my favorite composers, and generally I'll say Brahms, but like right there is Ligeti, or right there is Messiaen, or Steve Reich, or
Mhm.
all sorts of composers, Caroline Shaw, all these really wonderful composers. That I'm sorry, I just heard my kids come home and they just saw the teddy bears. Anyway, uh, it's really kind of hard to say, because no composer works in a vacuum, right? So it's you're informed by music all around you, and not just even quote unquote capital classical music, but like music, popular music, events of the world, events in one's own life. All of this plays a role in the music one writes, which is why it's so fascinating to listen to a composer's entire work, to see how they develop as human beings, and as composers, and as artists, and think about what may have informed some of these changes for them. I don't know.
So you're saying
That was a really long answer. I'm so sorry.
that's a great answer. That's a great answer. So what you're saying is that the best thing you can do is to be curious and
Yeah,
to devour as much of these people's work as you can.
yeah. There's so much phenomenal
Mm.
music out there, and honestly, I think right now in particular is I suppose every composer feels this way during their own lifetime. I really feel like today's an absolutely golden era of composition. There are so
Mm.
many wonderful composers out there. It's really astonishing how many wonderful composers there are in the world. And in fact, doing what I do, I teach online composition, so I get to teach people all over the world. So I'm constantly kind of just in awe of like what people are doing, what people are creating, perspectives that they're bringing to music, and how much richer our musical language is. Um, that and people being represented today that 100 years ago would never be able to have their music played, which only makes our language even richer. It's
Mhm.
such is such a wonderful era, I think, to be a musician, and to be a composer, to be able to hear all this wonderful music being written today, and a lot of
You're
it's
absolutely,
accessible.
yeah, it sure is. And it all sounds completely different too. I think that's the really stunning thing is that it doesn't
Yeah,
seem to matter how many centuries of music you're listening to. Once when you find someone good, it's like their voice just, you find another place in your head for them. And it's, you're absolutely right. Matt,
yeah.
last
Well, it
question.
makes me think of this Marcel Proust quote. It was it the
Mhm.
real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. I think that's it. But anyway, I think like that's what makes all of this so wonderful. Why like something like sonata form is so fascinating, because you can see how different composers from different walks of life, from different eras, from different countries. One thing Corleone always said to me was, I'm a 21st century composer. What does it mean to write insert form or piece in 21st century versus the 20th or 19th or 18th? What does it mean to be one living in the States versus in Finland, or in Japan or China, or
Mhm.
anywhere in the world? Um, it what does that how does that inform your music? And so I think that's where, again, going back to sonata form, where sonata form can be such a wonderful structure, because people from because you can use it to your advantage, and it's not limited to I believe anyway, to just one perspective. You can shape it to what works best for your own musical language, your own experience as a human being, your own experience as a musician.
It sounds like it lets you be curious and it
Yeah,
lets you
I
figure
think
things
so.
out.
And it lets you play within parameters.
I love that. I have one last question for you. We ask everybody.
Hmm.
You're a pianist and a composer,
Hmm.
but if you had 30 minutes, no consequences, could do anything. I'm gonna expand it out. Could do anything related to orchestral music. What are you doing?
I would like to have all the percussion instruments and just have a field day for a half hour playing them all.
You and the rest of the world. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna have I'm gonna figure out some sort of percussion instrument petting zoo for everybody who has secretly always coveted the percussion section. Matt, thank you so much. This was a joy. We will do this again.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Oh, it was so much fun. Thank you, Matt.
Oh, my pleasure.
Awesome. Awesome. I thought of one more piece of joy that I need you to say out loud for everybody, which is, what is the full name of your dog?
Oh, it's it's Igor Maurice, named after
Mhm.
Stravinsky and Ravel. Our first dog was Yurgi,
Mhm.
who's named after Ligeti. So
Perfection. That's perfect. We can end here. We're good.
okay, perfect. Yeah, yeah.